Committee Room 30, signed. 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 Committee Room 30, Committee Room 30, signed. 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 Committee Room 30, signed.
Okay, good afternoon everybody. Just to let you know, we're now being broadcast online and throughout Parliament buildings, so just welcome those members watching online. And at the minute we've got Stuart Dixon and I think we're still waiting Sinead, but we've apologies from Carol's. So members, have you any declarations of interest to declare? No? Okay, so the chairperson's business. So the first item's the bill from yesterday. Just as we all know, the final stage happened. Those of us who were in the chamber will know it was quite an emotional, quite a momentous time, wasn't it? And a very significant milestone for the victims and survivors. So just want to open it up in case anybody wants to say some words on it. Go ahead, please,
Chair,
Anya.
I suppose from my point of view, obviously you've alluded, it was a hugely emotional day, especially for my mother and obviously all of the other victims and survivors. And I just want to put on record the thanks and appreciation to you all for the kind words spoken yesterday. I think for myself, it really hit home afterwards when we went up to the Long Gallery and engaged with each and every victim and survivor, and again hearing the stories that they recanted, and I suppose the emotion from their point of view, it really did hit home.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anya. Anybody else? No? Okay. Oh, no, I think you're right. I think upstairs was there was a really nice buzz about it. I think.
Yeah, if I could
Sorry,
just
just a wee sentence finished. So I've just said, walking up to the room with Martin Carey, and he said, you know, this is a good day at work. You know, we don't have a lot of them in this place, but it was a good day at work, and I very much resonated with that. Go ahead, please, Timothy.
certainly when you went up to the room after, I think it was nice, the recognition that the key players, yourself included, got from the room, and the gifts that were presented, and the appreciation for the staff that have worked so hard to get us where we are. When the final statements essentially were being made and the speaker was doing his business to pass it, I went up to the public gallery, and there was almost a sense of a relief that everybody in there, a feel-good moment. And I had a fear, and as I said yesterday, this isn't a perfect bill, but I think people recognise that it has come on a long way from what was first introduced, and it was nice that there was an appreciation from the victim and survivors towards each other that engaged for so many years to get us to where we are. So they're the ones who deserve the credit, and the staff as well. And it was nice to see that recognised yesterday.
Yeah, no, thank you, Timothy, and certainly. Go ahead, please, Anya.
Yeah, Chair, I suppose the Junior Minister had alluded to some of the steps that will now take place within TO in terms of the inquiry and redress in particular. From a committee point of view, because I was approached by a victim and survivor 2 weeks ago, just asking a number of questions around redress in terms of the application process, additional support that TO will be implementing. But could we write the TO just maybe posing some of those questions?
Okay, no, that's content with that suggestion. I think there were a few people asked me yesterday as well, so I fully understand it. Can I bring Deborah in first, please? Go ahead.
I suppose, obviously I'm new to the committee and haven't really had the opportunity to sort of go through the whole entire process, but even looking at the bill and even trying to catch up, there's been a vast amount of work that has went into this. And I just want to say, Anya, in terms of my constituency colleague, it was really lovely to see your mum up here, and a really proud moment, for you. And it just shows how this has all come full circle as well, in terms of what the survivors and victims have had to go through here in relation to this. So and you're obviously very personal to this, so yesterday was a very big day for yourself, so it was lovely for the likes of yourself to have that moment with your mum here too. But it was just to say, whenever I was up in the Long Gallery, talking to some of the people, this is not the end either. There's a lot more to this process, and whilst yesterday and agree there was that sense of relief that finally this is over the line, there's still work to be done, and it's just, I wouldn't want the message to go out that we've sort of now closed the page on that, because the legislation's out the door. There's still some work to be done, and Anya's right there in terms of getting some of that information there, because there is that expectation now that we need to act on what has been agreed now from yesterday.
I think from a committee's point of view, we should keep those lines of communication open. Even, and I know we have from the very beginning had an open door policy with all the victims and survivors, but definitely to leave that door open to them.
Yeah, no, thank you. So I suppose there's a couple of follow-on actions then. So first of all, I wonder, could we write to Marie Breen-Smith and thank her, because I think she's been really vital in this process of that, a really useful conduit, and also then to Martin and his team in the Executive Office, just for the way they conducted themselves and kept us right at times. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, obviously the terms of reference are key to ensuring that what good work has been done continues, that's a vital piece of the inquiry going forward. I was speaking to a couple of the officers that are working on the redress. They've been in post a number of months. There's a good team getting together, and it's just making sure as a committee we're ensuring that they are being adequately staffed, bearing in mind with the change of posthumous date we'll have more applications that will come in. So it might be an idea early on in September when we return that we get a bit of a briefing from them to see how well the preparations are ongoing. I was fairly confident from speaking to them yesterday that plans are well afoot, but it's just to make sure that they're getting all the support they need, that when this does go live, that they're in the best possible place to ensure that there's no hitches early on.
So the Assistant Clerk just reminded me there that the Department is going out to consult on the redress over the summer, so the regulations, sorry, and so I suppose the question would be, how are they going to ensure, that as many people as possible respond and stuff? Okay, just the last thing on this item then, there's a draft press release has been circulated, I think came through in the table pack at pages 3 to 4. I'm just going to seek your agreement for it to go out. Content? Yeah. Okay, 3.1, consultative forum to Minister of Health, Adoption Records, and 3.5, Minister for Communities, Access to Records. I'm going to refer you to pages 6 to 9 of the pack and pages 5 to 8 of the table pack. Just to advise that I was copied into correspondence from the Chair of the Victims and Survivors Consultative Forum to the Health Minister, seeking a meeting to discuss access to adoption records in the context of the forthcoming inquiry. Just to advise that the Chair outlines the forum's concerns regarding the adequacy of access to records for the purposes of the inquiry. Correspondence also highlights a number of issues raised by the Truth Recovery Independent Panel and 4 members, including difficulties in accessing records. So just a reminder that the committee has undertaken extensive work in relation to access to records, and most recently wrote to the First Minister, Deputy First Minister and Health Minister on the 18th of June to request that they undertake a formal cross-departmental scoping exercise on the design of a permanent archive, taking full account of the recommendations of the independent panel and initiate preparatory work towards bespoke legislation to establish and govern the archive with a specific aim of removing existing barriers to victims and survivors and their families in accessing records. To date, we have not, as a committee, received a response, and further to advise that the committee has received a response to our correspondence of the 1st of May regarding PRONI and access to records, and this can be found on pages 5 to 8 of the table pack. The Minister has advised that PRONI will update the committee on all significant developments where preservation of relevant records is concerned, particularly where issues may arise around transferring records to PRONI and the cooperation of relevant institutions and organisations. PRONI officials are currently engaging with both the Belfast and South Eastern Health and Social Care Trusts to progress the transfer of maternity records relevant to the inquiry and redress scheme. The Minister has also indicated that a private deposit scheme between PRONI and the Diocese of Down and Connor has been signed relating to the transfer of files from the St Joseph Children's Residential Institution, and work is now underway to transfer these files to PRONI later this month. PRONI officials are happy to provide an oral briefing to the committee following upon completion of phase 3 of its work as part of the Truth Recovery Programme. So I'm just going to seek your agreement to write to the Victims and Survivors Consultative Forum to advise them of the above and request that they keep the committee updated should a meeting take place with the Health Minister. Are we agreed? And then also to add an oral briefing with PRONI to the committee's forward work programme for September onwards. Agreed? Okay, so 3.2, Voice of Justice Alliance. This is a meeting request that's come in and you'll find it on pages 10 to 11 of your pack. So I've received correspondence from this organisation group for Justice Alliance, who are an independent and non-political organisation working across communities and sectors to advocate for fairness, accountability and better outcomes for those most affected by policy decisions. They're seeking an introductory meeting between the committees, given the committee's role in matters relating to equality, good relations, racial equality and social inclusion. So I'm going to seek your agreement for that meeting to be set up between me, the group and the Deputy Chair. Great? Right. Okay, so 3.3 Survivors Together, another meeting request. I'm going to refer you to page 12 of the meeting pack and just to advise that I've received correspondence from Survivors Together seeking a meeting to discuss concerns around the long-term financial commitment from the Executive Office and COSIGA. Just a reminder that there's a statutory requirement for this post to be independently reviewed every 5 years in order to establish whether or not it continues to be required. Professor Alexis Jay undertook this review and submitted her final report and recommendations in February 2025. Following this, the First and Deputy First Ministers extended the COSIGA office for a further period of 2 years up until December 2027. So just a reminder that the committee wrote to Ministers on the 6th of March this year asking for further information on future support services beyond 2027 that COSIGA would be discussed during Ministers' next appearance and sought additional information on progress in relation to the Memorial Programme and the commissioning of prevalence studies. To date, no response has been received. So I'm going to seek your agreement to write to the First and Deputy First Ministers to request a response to the outstanding correspondence and to seek to arrange an informal meeting with Survivors Together with the Deputy Chair. Are we agreed? Agreed. Okay. Draft minutes, item 4, members. I'm going to refer you to pages 14 to 24 of your pack for the minutes from the 24th of June, and I'm just going to ask for people content. Okay. Matters arising, 5.1 Independent Commission for Reconciliation and Information Recovery, follow-up queries, and 5.6 Minister for Foreign Affairs and Trade, ICRA. So I'm going to refer you to pages 26 to 27 of the pack and pages 32 to 35 of the table pack. Just to advise that the committee has received a response from the Independent Commission to the committee's correspondence of the 17th of June following a follow-up query from their oral evidence session. ICRIR has advised that in relation to the number of requests for information made to Anne Garda Síochána, that they have checked their records and confirmed that 8 letters containing 10 deaths have been issued and those requests remain outstanding. Just also advise that the committee has also received a response from the Minister for Foreign Affairs and Trade to the committee's correspondence of the 18th of June 2026, which can be found on pages 32 to 35 of the table pack. The Minister has outlined the Irish Government's areas of recent progress and its commitment to legacy processes. In relation to the outstanding requests from ICRIR, the Minister has highlighted that they cannot cooperate with the current body. It is their view that the legislation establishing the ICRIR remains incompatible with the European Convention on Human Rights. The agreed fundamental and necessary reform of the ICRIR which will become the new Legacy Commission, has not yet taken place. They are waiting for the enactment of the UK legislation, coupled with our own, to provide an adequate legal basis for cooperation into the future. Anyone want to comment? Deborah, go ahead please.
I suppose welcome just the fact that they've come back just to clarify in terms of the amount of letters and the deaths that it relates to. But I would say this, one is one too many. Yeah. One letter that hasn't been responded to is one too many, and I quite frankly I am quite cross, to be honest, at the response from the the Minister for the Department of Foreign Affairs. I mean, to say that the Irish government is committed to playing their full part in the legacy process, like, they have not even acknowledged one single letter that has been sent. I mean, I find that absolutely disgraceful, and I actually think we should be going back to the Minister to ask, why have they not even acknowledged the fact that this is a body, regardless of whether they like it or not. This is a body who is trying to find answers for people who have went through extreme trauma. The Irish government is heaping trauma on innocent victims, and that is my view, and I fundamentally will hold that view. whilst the Irish government continue to stonewall victims here in Northern Ireland, I find it quite disgraceful. So I do think we should be going back in the strongest possible terms in relation to this, because I find even the letters just a bit of a whitewash, to be honest, and it is extremely hurtful for victims.
Thank you, Deborah. Go ahead, please, Timothy.
Yeah, so the ICRIR have come back and confirmed that it's 8 letters regarding 10 deaths. That's 10 families that are awaiting information to try and bring some sort of closure to what has happened to their loved ones. So the fault in this does not lie with ICRIR. It lies squarely with the Irish government, who I have said on numerous occasions were an active participant in what happened here in Northern Ireland. They're an active participant, whether they like to admit it or not, to the murder and mayhem that we've seen throughout our province. And to turn around and say that they can't cooperate with the current body, I think is a slap in the face for innocent victims. There's no getting away and there's no hiding from this. The Irish government want to have a seat at the table to equality proof what the UK government brings forward, but when the challenge is put to them to give over the information that they currently hold, they're not willing to do that. So I think that I agree with Deborah that we need to write back to say that this isn't acceptable, and that clarity is brought and information is shared. How would they like it if it was some of their family members? 10 families seeking information about what happened to their loved one, and the Irish government is holding on to that information. Like the ICRIR was quite clear that this is only information they have sought regarding murders with cross-border element to it. So I believe there's a lot more cases they are investigating that have that cross-border element. But these are 8 letters regarding 10 deaths, 10 families that they're holding on to, and I think it's extremely unfair and it's disrespectful to those families that are wanting closure and wanting truth and wanting justice.
Yeah, I don't think, I haven't read it in great details, I've had a busy few days there, but I don't think they've addressed the issue that we have invited them to a meeting. They just avoided that, did they? Is that everybody else's understanding? Go ahead, please. Sorry,
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. I think a couple of things. So firstly, I think this letter stands in stark contrast to the letter that the committee received earlier this year from the Department for Foreign Affairs, where they claimed that they would be an active participant in ensuring truth and reconciliation here on this island. Their letter, as you say, rightly ignores the request from this committee that they would come and present and outline why, in their view, they continue to deny one of the greatest human rights, and that is the right to truth and the right to justice, and to be questioned on the greatest human right, and that is the role that they played in the ending of life here in Northern Ireland. But for me, it doesn't come as a great surprise given the conduct of the Irish government in relation to the ongoing inquiry into the Ombudsman, where all that they will provide is photocopies of newspaper articles. But I do think it talks to a wider point that the Irish government preach one thing, but in reality they continue to harbour a strong distaste for wanting to ensure that their role in the troubles here in Northern Ireland is exposed. So I would want to go back to them and ask them, are they going to answer the committee's question, inviting them here to represent the views and the decisions that they've taken.
Yeah, any other views in the room? I suppose the other aspect to it is that even it's the stonewalling, to use your word, Deborah. Like, there's one thing to say, look, the legislative framework isn't in place, but you know, we've taken note of this, and when it happens, then we will, you know, or we're doing preparatory work or something. It's the fact that there's nothing is being said in that place. Now, I did ask, as you may recall, I asked Sir Declan Morgan. I said, whenever I intervened after you'd asked your questions, and said, is this because the legislation is in place? And he said no. So I think if we could go back to Sir Declan Morgan and ask him his opinion on the response we've received. Okay, everybody, go ahead.
And Chair, sorry, can I just check? We're going to also clarify with when we go back to the Department for Affairs and Minister, in terms of the clarity that we have received on the amount of letters that have been sent. You know, just to say that we have received this as well, and that they should have record and receive those as well. Just, I think it wouldn't do any harm just to point out to them how many deaths, etc., that this represents.
Absolutely, thank you. Okay, content to move on. Okay, 5.2 Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission invitation, so refer you to pages 28 to 31 of your pack. So the committee agreed at its meeting on the 17th of June 2026 to invite the Human Rights Commission to come before the committee to discuss its views on the ICRIR. Just to advise that the committee has now received a response to this correspondence and that the Human Rights Commission has declined the invitation. To date, the focus of the Commission's concerns has been the human rights standards. Primarily, this has been the legal foundation for the structure of and ultimate effectiveness of, in the Article 2 ECHR sense of the arrangements, to the extent that the internal operation and culture of the ICRIR might have been affected by any of those aspects. And they are unable to judge, nor have they assessed the internal workings of the ICRIR that has been set up in the May review report. Has been set out in the May review report. So just to advise that given the Commission's role in the ongoing legislative scrutiny of the Northern Ireland Troubles Bill and the remedial order, the outstanding interstate application before the European Court of Human Rights and the consideration of the UK Supreme Court judgment in the Dillon and others case, they do not feel that it would be appropriate at this juncture to appear to discuss the work of ICRIR. If the committee has any particular human rights concerns, the Commission is happy to provide a written briefing, and if any members have concerns about the proposed structure of the new Legacy Commission, they will also be advising on this in due course. Okay, just to note that then. Yeah.
I'm happy to note it, Chair.
Sorry, I didn't realise you wanted to.
Yeah, but a couple of things. So first of all, the Equality Commission were obviously involved in the Dillon judgment and were still able to come before this committee, and also the Human Rights Commission appeared before the Northern Ireland Select Affairs Committee not too long ago to discuss these issues. So I would just be keen to ascertain why the Chief Commissioner believes that she can appear before a Westminster Select Committee but can't appear before a Northern Ireland Assembly Committee.
Well, she has come before, especially in relation to Article 2. So are we content to go back then? Is that a formal proposal then? Yep. Okay. So 5.3 draft press release victims payment scheme. Just going to refer you to pages 32 to 33 of your pack. Just to advise that our strategic planning meeting, the committee agreed to issue a press release at its last meeting before summer recess, highlighting that the victims payment scheme will close to new applications in August 2026. So I'm just going to ask your agreement to ask the team to release this. Content? Okay, I think you're going to talk about the 16th of July then for the release. Okay, thank you. 5.4, Equality Commission engagement with the Northern Ireland Civil Service. Refer you to pages 34 to 35. Just to advise that the committee has received a response from the Equality Commission to the committee's correspondence of the 24th of June 2026, asking if any engagement had taken place between the Commission and the Northern Ireland Civil Service. Just to advise that the Commission has confirmed that they have not identified any contact between the Civil Service and the Commission on its decision to withdraw its staff from taking part in Pride parades. Just to advise that a date has now been confirmed with the head of the Civil Service, and Ms Jane Brady will appear before the committee at our meeting on Wednesday the 23rd of September, and we can maybe pick that up then, so we'll just note that for now. Okay, so 5.5, COSICA working paper, pages 10 to 31 of your table pack. So COSICA has developed a new working paper on the need for a child abuse prevalence study in Northern Ireland. The working paper reflects new data published worldwide, and in particular the UK and Ireland about child abuse prevalence and how this learning might be applied in Northern Ireland. The comparative table of prevalence studies can be found in Annex 2 of the paper. And just a reminder that the committee previously agreed to ask Korea to examine prevalence studies, that this would be considered in light of the paper from COSICA on the basis that it may address the committee's earlier request. So just going to seek your agreement to invite COSICA to provide oral evidence to the committee on the study. Following that briefing, the committee could then consider whether we would request some further research from RAISE. Are we content? Go ahead, please.
Yeah, certainly happy to support this. Something I've long wanted to take place, this piece of information and data collection. My query would be that if there was going to be a prevalence study, who or what department would be best placed to carry that out? I had raised this previously with the Justice Minister. There seems to be some thought, should it be health, should it be justice, or based on what we cover here in TEO, should it be the First and Deputy First Minister? Is there any way that prior to COSICA coming and prior to discussing this again, that we could write to the ministers to see are they intending or have this in the agenda to carry out, or could this be indeed a piece of work on behalf of the executive, because I do believe it is cross-cutting.
Sorry, again, the Assistant Clerk's just reminded me that the correspondence of the 4th of March, we did ask on that issue of the prevalence study, and that's still outstanding. But we've agreed that we'll go back and chase that up. But I think that was part of the reason way back that they developed the interdepartmental working group that looked at HIA and then mother and baby institutions and stuff, and I think that's because it just didn't fall with one department. So I'm not sure whether that's something that maybe have to step up again if they wanted to take this forward. Okay, just one more item, then we'll go into our first oral briefing. So this is the First and Deputy First Minister. I'm going to refer you to pages 36 to 38 of the table pack. Just to advise that the First and Deputy First Ministers have responded to the committee's correspondence of the 24th of June, advising that tomorrow the First Minister will be attending the ceremony to mark the start of Ireland's presidency of the Council of the European Union in Dublin, and the Deputy First Minister will be attending the commemoration of the Somme in France. Sorry, does that mean that was that today then? Does that mean?
Yes.
Sorry, today, yes. So the committee, just advise the committee team in the DALO are currently seeking to arrange an alternative date in September for the Ministers to attend committee. Just to note. Go ahead.
We look at it's not just September between now and the end of the mandate to try and nail down what dates the First and Deputy First Minister are coming here. I certainly believe they're treating us with contempt. Both of these events that they're attending would have been arranged weeks, if not months in advance, and to come and keep us holding on to the last minute. And at the end of the day, if the dates we give them don't suit, we'll then work with us in their diaries to try and move it around. And to go back to the point I made last week, if it means that we have to do like the Department of Economy do, arrange a Tuesday morning meeting to have them here, so be it. But it's important that this committee is scrutinising the work of the First Minister and Deputy First Minister, and it certainly feels to me that they're giving us the run round.
Thank you, Timothy. Go ahead, please, Deputy Chair.
Yeah, Chair, I concur and commented on this on the last occasion. Both of those dates were well published in advance. They were clearly known. And if they were genuine and wishing to work with the committee, they would have come back at the time the invitation was sent. And they would have said that they would have highlighted both of those events to us. Both of those events are long time events in their diary. And as Timothy has said, this committee would have been willing to meet with them at any time in the last number of weeks, whether that's on a Wednesday or some other occasion. So really, this is not an acceptable response. The reason for not being here today is a fair enough reason, but the response is inadequate to the extreme.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. I'm going to move on then to our first briefing then. Item 6, we're going to hear from departmental officials. I'm going to seek your agreement for Hansard to record. Are they coming? Sorry, so Hansard are recording remotely. Okay, so just to remind that the committee agreed for departmental officials to provide an urgent oral briefing on the actions being taken by the department, including any follow-up actions for TO following the meeting of the racial equality subgroup, and to request further details on the planned intervention programmes. So I'm going to refer you to pages 127 to 130 of your pack for the clerk's brief, pages 39 to 52 for a copy of the committee's response to the draft framework for race relations and delivery plan, as well as a copy of both of these documents, pages 40 to 42 of the tail pack for a response from the Department to the Committee's correspondence of the 4th of June regarding Annika Women's Collective. And did we get a written briefing?
Yes, went out in version 2. So
okay, so your the written briefing is in page 36 to 39 of your table pack. Okay. So, thank you for waiting. So I'm just going to welcome to the meeting Orla McStravick, who is the Director of Race Relations and Integration, Colin Moffat, who is the Director of Civil Contingencies and Strategic Risk Management, Gavin King, who's the Head of TBUC, District Councils, Camps and Interventions. So thank you very much for coming to committee today. I just would invite you to make some opening remarks, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair, members of the committee. So I do appreciate members will have just received the briefing paper, so may not have had time to read it in full. So if helpful, I plan just to provide a short overview of how TEO has been supporting the response to the recent unrest and leave most of the time then for discussion. So as you've rightly said there, Chair, the issue cuts across a number of areas within the department, and therefore I'm joined by Colin and Gavin. I just want to begin by acknowledging and condemning the violent attack in North Belfast on the 8th of June, and our thoughts very much remain with the victim and his family. Ministers and the Executive collectively have been clear that there is no place for the violent scenes which followed, and we recognise the very real concern and anxiety these events have caused, not only for the individuals but in the context of wider sense of safety and belonging within communities. Members will be aware that ministers met with the racial equality subgroup to hear firsthand how those impacted are feeling and to better understand their needs. The discussion was helpful and provided some areas for further consideration, including the potential for anti-racism as part of the school curriculum, how the subgroup could support the civil contingencies group on developing responses to any future racist violence, and representation from the subgroup on our community cohesion group to support the development of interventions. So officials will be engaging further with subgroups as we explore these. And it was right that the initial response was led by the Police Service of Northern Ireland, and our department played its part in the regular multi-agency meetings to ensure that information sharing and situational awareness. The SCG, which is the Strategic Coordination Group, identified a number of sub-cells to support the immediate response, including a humanitarian cell led by DFC, a communication cell led by the Executive Information Service, and a community cohesion cell which is led by TEO. The pre-existing community cohesion group was repurposed to support the SCG and focus on the immediate needs and actions required to enhance community confidence. It has been working to identify urgent action to support those living in fear, with initial views indicating a need for information on personal safety support locally, early removal of racist graffiti, community integration activities over the summer period, and readily available information on local community support. Work is ongoing apace to refine and develop these into deliverable interventions. We are grateful for the insights from the voluntary and community sector organisations, including the Racial Equality Subgroup, to help shape this work and to guide the delivery of the interventions towards local need. In parallel, TEO has taken a series of specific actions in response to the unrest and to support good relations across communities. This has included the release of $400,000 for the department's planned interventions programme. It provides targeted support for community-based activity which offers positive alternatives for young people who may be at risk of becoming involved in antisocial behaviour, sectarianism, racism or recruitment by paramilitary gangs. Letters of offer were issued to 71 groups which between them will engage over 1,400 young people. Further to this, the 26-27 T-Buck Camps programme has now begun. This is a key initiative supporting young people from all backgrounds to build relationships, challenge historic divisions and take part in positive peace-building activity. In this year's programme, 100 camps are expected to be delivered across all 11 council areas involving over 3,500 young people. Recognising the need for flexibility to react to increased needs following the unrest, ministers have also approved the development of a £500,000 response fund. The fund is designed to enable agile, targeted support in the areas where it is needed most. It will focus on three main aims: to provide support to minority ethnic individuals and families that have been the target of recent unrest, to provide diversionary activities for those most likely to be drawn into criminal or antisocial behaviour, and to support actions to build and rebuild community cohesion in the areas most in need. The funding will be delivered through existing partners with activity already underway across a number of areas. These are measures that we have already been able to put in place this summer. However, we recognise that building community cohesion is a long-term endeavour. With this in mind, the Community Cohesion Group has also developed a suite of potential interventions which are preventative, and they're currently under ministerial consideration with the aim of enhancing cohesion in the medium and longer term. That is just a very high-level overview of the work to date, but we're very happy to take any questions or discuss further.
Okay, thank you so much. I suppose what strikes me from the 400,000 and the diversionary funding, etc. We've seen that for years, especially around the 12th or July, where it's not really changing hearts and minds. It's basically just trying to keep a lid on tensions and keeping the kids offside. What work has actually been done to try and change hearts and minds? You know, sorry, and just one other point. I'm conscious that in the end of violence against women and girls, they did some academic looking at why men and boys hold those feelings, and so that then they can better target it. Is something similar happening in terms of targeting the people who are responsible about why you're doing it and how can we change it?
That is part of the interventions that ministers are considering from the communication group under the longer term.
Okay.
I suppose there was the stuff that we've talked about in the immediate term was very much about, we know the summer is a difficult period and we know there are tensions there, so how do we try and divert people away from that? But quite rightly, there is a longer term piece around how do we change the attitudes and behaviours, and that is what the community cohesion group we're looking at in terms of those preventative longer term interventions which ministers are currently considering. Now, they obviously will be a starting point, and that is something we would very much want to build on, but they are currently under consideration, and they do focus on the longer term preventative.
It might be useful, because you mentioned, Chair, the Planned Interventions Programme and some points around it, so it might be useful to talk a little bit about that. And then in doing so, as Orla has mentioned, there's the Response Fund and also the Teapot Camps. So it's maybe just, but again, you can see how we go. But so in terms of the Planned Interventions Programme, you'd mentioned around impact and what is this programme? You know, what's the impact that the programme's having, or are we just sort of shifting people about and so on and so forth? So fundamentally, as Orla's mentioned, the Planned Interventions Programme is going to provide 71 projects engaging vulnerable or at-risk individuals. The aims of the programme are, as you mentioned, to divert young people, but it is also about providing positive experiences, skills development and opportunities. And it is also about supporting cross-community contact, understanding and relationship building. But how do we evidence that, or how can we say, you know, as you say, when people say, look, we're just, you know, bussing people or moving people about, what's actually happening? And for a number of years, we've been working intensively with EA to get outcomes, qualitative and quantitative, so we can begin to understand how is the programme, you know, making an impact. So, quantitatively, 97% of participants on the programme feel that they're less likely to engage in negative behaviour. And that brings up another issue, another challenge that we'll have with good relations, which is around the counterfactual. Because when you have disorder, you always think to yourself, the programmes aren't working, or the programme, you know, because obviously we have disorder. But the counterfactual is, you know, the understanding of how much worse in scope and scale might that disorder have been had we not had these programmes and had hearts and minds not been changed. So that 97% of participants who feel that they're less likely to engage in negative behaviour is an element towards that. 82% of participants feel more favourable towards people from a different background to their own after being on the programme. And some qualitative as well, because quantitative statistics are important, but also I think it's important to hear qualitatively what people think. So one comment that a participant made was, I learned a lot from taking part in it, in a planned intervention. I hope that going forward I can make better decisions. So that's the hope, that there's that impact. Another participant said, I realise how my actions within the community can impact on my family and friends, but also affect my employment and travel plans in the future. So there's that element of realism around it. And then just one quote from a project leader, because quotes from participants is important, but you know, these projects can't be delivered without the expertise of the Education Authority in this specific case. We might talk about other partners that we'll have later on. But from a project leader, they begin to see how their behaviour has consequences for themselves, but then also their community. It's raising it up into that wider element. So hopefully that answers some questions around.
Okay, no, thank you. No, I wasn't being dismissive. It was more just, you know, how do we make sure that the money's well spent? And I just wanted to pick up on a figure there, Orla. I think you talked about 500,000 that possibly will go to support those people affected. So, for example, I was speaking to a gentleman who had his whole house burnt, everything gone, passport, everything, and he had to sleep in his car for 4 nights. So, like, in terms of the financial support, like the amount, if you added up everybody who's lost their business, for example, some of the businesses in South Belfast, like you could probably put a knot or 2 knots on that in terms of the actual impact. So how is that going to be allocated? How are you going to ensure that, first of all, that people are aware of it, but also how, you know, what sort of way are people going to be financially supported or otherwise with that?
I suppose it's probably just worth clarifying that the response fund isn't going to operate as everybody puts an application in for money in that regard. We will have to work through our existing mechanisms that we have in place. So primarily it will be through our good relations networks, through councils, and through the likes of our CIT programme. So it won't necessarily be to replace people who have lost buildings or anything like that. There will be other mechanisms for people to do that. And I suppose if people are homeless, we would very much be encouraging them to present to the housing executive for support there if they're
I think it was just so stunned, it was so but I suppose the point, sorry to interrupt Orla, but I think the point is that, for example, Annika, Women's Collective in my constituency, they did amazing work with the local churches. They did the collection, did the foot parcels, nappies, etc. So there were people who, they were impacted, there's no question, and totally reprehensible, but they were sort of plugged into a network and they did get immediate response and could feel the warmth of the wider community. So it's more just about how do we promote something that people who are not connected into some of those existing networks, so that they feel, again, the fact that somebody was sleeping in their car for 4 days before they would actually admit that somebody they've lost everything. How would that programme be further promoted?
Yeah, and I think that's why, obviously this is a recent thing that we've been able to make this available, and I think we are part of the reason, not only just because it's a mechanism that we can use and have the ability to use, but the likes of the groups that we work with on the ground, the councils, the Good Relations programme, have those networks in place, and they're better placed to make those connections with people than we would be at a central level. So that is why there is that approach there. I think there is something in terms of the comms as well. So we put something on the NI Direct page as well around, if you have been impacted, here's how to get support. And we have shared a lot of information through our own networks as well to make people aware of signposting to places that they can go to get the information about where they need support.
Okay, so I don't have a question, but it's just a suggestion. So in future, see those sort of links, send them to us, and then we can put them out on our social media, but it wasn't a criticism, it was just maybe a suggestion, because we would have a slightly different reach. Thank you. I'm going to go to the Deputy Chair first. Go ahead, please, Stuart.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for your presentation this afternoon. Would you agree with me that if you don't understand the problem, you can't deliver the solution?
Yes, and I suppose that is, and I know that we have a draft framework for race relations that we have just consulted on, and we're going through the process, but one of the things that aims to do as well is to try and look at what are the root causes, what is driving what we are seeing, what are the issues, and how do we address them on a whole community basis. So yes, that is part of that approach that we're trying to take.
Go ahead, please, Stuart. Are you still there?
Yeah, but apologies. This isn't the first time that these sorts of incidents have occurred. And I take you back to the questions the Chair asked initially, which is about the research in the background. And it's all very well getting satisfaction surveys or response surveys from participants, but actually there is a need, and it is like that violence against women and girls issue that the Chair raises. There is a need for a deep academic dive into the community reasons why we have it. Now, we will know some of the reasons. They are poverty, they're poor quality of education. All of those are maybe fairly obvious reasons. But I think in the specific context of Northern Ireland, where we have probably one of the least ethnic diverse communities in the United Kingdom, that it is important that we get some quality research done to help us understand the problem. The other thing then I want to comment on is that just turning the money tap on every time an incident occurs doesn't appear to me to be the best way to A, to spend that money, or B, again, to tackle the inherent problems that there are. We have, unfortunately, across a wide range, not just a wide range of government departments, we have lots of stop-start programs, mainly, but not wholly, in education, to deliver a wide range of summer activities, whether it's diversionary activities from sectarianism or whether it's diversionary activities from racism. But it just seems to me that you're producing a very reactive response rather than perhaps a long-term, broader picture look at what those issues are.
Yeah, maybe just on the first point, we did do an initial piece of work with communities in South Belfast and some in Ballymena, just to start that process around engaging with communities to understand sort of the root causes and what was driving it, but it was on a small scale. Under the draft framework for race relations in the delivery framework, there is an action in there around that community dialogue piece in the slightly longer term, so it is definitely something that we accept as a need, and we would be keen to progress further. On the reactive stuff, I think, yes, some of this is in the short term and very much to address immediate needs and to react to what we have seen. But that doesn't detract from the longer term work that needs to be done, and there is that parallel track around those sort of longer term community cohesion integration type interventions. So there is a bit of a parallel. I think it would be remiss of us maybe not to do something in the short term, even if we appreciate it's not going to solve the long term problem, but we are mindful of the risks that still exist, particularly over the summer period. So it is a bit of a parallel track there with two pieces, the longer term and the very immediate short term work going on at the same time.
And just finally from me, Chair, thank you for that, and I do appreciate that. But I mean, again, you referenced both Ballymena and South Belfast and the recent issues that have occurred. But these types of activities and races go way back beyond both of those horrible events which happened in the last couple of years. And that's why I'm again re-emphasising the point about the need to have a better understanding of what it is you're actually dealing with. And I'm not convinced that you do actually understand the depth of the problem, the breadth of the problem, and how we need to deploy some of the solutions to deal with it going forward. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, I'm going to move on. Deborah, please.
Thank you. Thanks for coming up to the committee. Though, if you don't mind, Chair, I am going to say I am disappointed that we have got this briefing just today, and it's only 3 pages. Now, it doesn't take long to read through it, and I'm not denigrating the work that goes on by yourselves. There's a vast amount of work that goes on, and it's very good, and you've outlined the qualitative data in relation to it. But at the same time, this is a major issue at the moment. And like, I represent Fermanagh and South Tyrone, and I wouldn't say it's a hotbed by any stretch of the mark, but there's increasing tensions even there. And, I, following on from the Deputy Chair, like, I'm just not sure we're struggling to catch up with the public sentiment here in this building in terms of what people actually think and feel outside the door. And that's concerning, because if I can touch on something, I mean, we'd heard and seen, funding for TBUC was in a very precarious situation. I think that's now resolved, if I'm correct. But I mean, that just shows the precarious nature of this. And I wouldn't want to think that just because we had a race riot and a race incident that happened, that then turns the tap on for the funding, like others have already said in the room. This problem is not going away. So can you maybe talk to that in terms of, what you're actually doing? It's the same, I suppose, from the Deputy Chair. What is actually happening to prepare for potential going forward?
Yeah, well, I'll maybe just speak to the good relations aspect on that. So we mentioned earlier that the Planned Interventions Programme, we've talked a little bit about that. And as you mentioned about other programmes, we've the TBUC Camps programme is being delivered, which is very positive in that space. But then also maybe a little bit about the response fund that might be helpful, and probably just speaks to the point that both the Deputy Chair and Chair made around what we use to inform these responses and how we do that. So see the response fund very much as a way to build on the existing programmes that we are already delivering, and just the point being made, that recognition that these issues are wide in scope and scale. The response fund, the idea behind it is to be fluid and flexible, and it can respond both to new ideas and approaches which links into what, as I was said. But the immediate focus is on 3 delivery mechanisms, one of which is a rapid programme by EA, then some intervention by councils, and then CIT work. So the additional funding will help support those 3 strands. We might talk a little bit about them. The only one maybe mentioned at the moment in terms of the rapid programme, this is a programme from the Education Authority, but it is very much built on analysis over time, as the Deputy Chair and as the Chair alluded to, with universities around creating a model and a model to respond proactively to unrest, a 5-step model where there's an identification of issues, communication with key stakeholders, agreeing approach, and then an action, and then reviewing. So hopefully that programme will offer a positive element in that space.
But it is response. It is response. It's when the incident happens.
There's a response element to it. There is also a debrief element to the programme. And as I say, it does build on both the campus planned interventions and the other programmes that we run, which do have that longer term impact, and which, as I say, is supported by the qualitative and quantitative evidence. But and as I say, I do understand that when disorder occurs, we can feel that those programmes, in terms of whether they're operating effectively, but the data is there, and it's the counterfactual. It could be worse without it.
Okay, so in terms of like if you ask questions about this, so what I'm going to ask a few questions just around, I suppose, the interdepartmental work that goes on in relation to this, and when you ask questions in this chamber, you basically get back, immigration is not a policy. You know, it's not. It's we've no real remit in terms of immigration policy here, but we still have a duty in relation to what happens here in Northern Ireland. So I've seen here that in terms of the governance structures and strategic planning group and things like that, there you've outlined membership of all of this, with there's Home Office sitting on that and all of that, the tactical delivery group. I don't actually know what they're actually doing, if you don't mind me saying. I can see who's sitting on them, but I don't actually know what they're specifically doing. And I've asked questions in here recently in terms of the Home Office and what information they're sharing with ourselves. What data, what information are we sharing in real time that can help dictate these programmes, that can help dictate not just a response, but that we're actually planning in terms of going into communities where there may be rising tensions, etc. That's what I want to understand, because I think it was last week we got information that said where appropriate, Home Office will share information. What's deemed as appropriate? What is that?
Maybe I could just come in on some of yours. So I think, yes, there is the response bit that Gavin has talked about in responding to when we've been in a crisis situation. I suppose to just give some context, that doesn't mean that because the violence has stopped that, okay, we're back to normal and, we all move on in our day-to-day business. So Department of Justice are now chairing a recovery group, which would be normal to have that after we move out of the initial response stage. I think the difference this time round will be, that recovery group intends to keep some of those sub-cells that were operational to get into the preventative space, so that we don't all just revert back to day to day. So there is a preparedness piece in there around we need to do preventative stuff, and we need to keep live to the fact that there are tensions across communities and there are risks that remain within communities, and that if things escalate, we need to be able to respond again quite quickly. On the data point, obviously, and as you said, immigration policy isn't devolved and it is led by Home Office. Home Office does share a small amount of high-level data sets, and on a monthly basis we do receive some data, and the Home Office publish quarterly statistics around sort of numbers of asylum seekers, council areas that they're based in, and that is primarily a lot of what we get. We also are able to share some of that with partners where there are data sharing arrangements in place and where partners have signed up to those. We don't own the data, so we aren't able to share that wider. Home Office will only share with us certain elements of it, and it is generally of a high level, so it will be things like the number of asylum seekers that are receiving support that are based here, the high-level council areas that they're accommodated in, but it doesn't go down further than that. We do share that with partners who would have a service provision role, so the likes of Housing Executive, where there's move-on information. Housing Executive will get an indication of the number of move-ons coming through the systems, because will have an impact in terms of if they have to provide support from a housing perspective, and obviously education in terms of those move-on arrangements as well, where they might have to provide school places where people are changing geographical locations, etc. We have always raised the issue of data because we don't have everything, but we are constrained by what we receive from Home Office. Now, I will say we do get a lot more now than we did a couple of years ago, but we will not hold data on every single person that has arrived here under either asylum or whatever route, where they live, what they do. We just won't have that level of information to be able to share. We just get what Home Office can provide, and they do publish quarterly statistics as well that are open to anybody.
Sorry, just before you go on 1 second. So when we had Nisha Tandon here from Arts Acta, she had talked about those tension monitoring groups, and I'm just wondering, is that something that came through strongly in terms of the consultation responses to the draft framework?
Tension monitoring groups. I mean, we are looking at a piece of work in terms of very way back. We had done a piece of work with, and it was to inform dispersal arrangements for asylum. So it was to inform Home Office in terms of where there are service capacity issues or where there are high levels of hate crime. We are looking at that now in the context of it's not really about informing that anymore. How do we look on a bigger scale around what our communities look like, and how they and where there are areas that might be risks or particular tensions. So there is a piece of work ongoing at the minute with partners around that, but it's not at an end stage yet.
Okay, just raising it. Sorry, go ahead.
You see, in relation to that data, I'm taking it's shared between departments, so therefore could we as a committee see that data?
We are only allowed to share it where there is a data sharing arrangement with departments on the SPG. Basically, that's the limitation. We are not permitted by Home Office to share it any wider. And most of it, though, is published on the Home Office quarterly statistics, but they will be a quarter behind.
So they're just giving you information that's published anyway?
Most of the time. We do get some information which isn't data. It is it hasn't been through the quality assurance process in terms of information, so we will get weekly information on numbers of people here, but it is not formal data, and we're not allowed to share that.
Okay, time for me to move on. Claire, please.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose it's just to kind of come back to that underlying cause, trying to understand why this is the case. And you talked, Gavin, about your work with the Education Authority, but I suppose I would take that further and see this maybe more as a cross-departmental issue, as most issues tend to be, and look at it even from a perspective of needs, and try to understand where those issues are. Are you working as a department across economy and education just to understand that? Because interestingly enough, I had a constituent who sent me an email recently, and they said that in the last quarter, so up till March 2026, 23,000 of 16 to 24-year-olds were not in education, employment and training, and that's an increase of nearly 64%. So are we nearly seeing that correlation with with what we're talking about here? Yes, there's things that trigger behaviours, but ultimately it's because of people's circumstances and surroundings and lack of employment opportunities or education opportunities. And are we as an executive even investing in those appropriately so that these people can access them, and hopefully that acts as some form of upstream diversion to not take them down this path?
Yeah, just a couple of points I'll make on that from a TBUC, together building the United Community, just a wider strategy point of view. The strategy is cross-departmental. There's a number of headline actions under the strategy, which involve other departments, shared housing, United Youth, etc. There's a good relations programme board that brings them all together to share information. And just one point on delivery, when programmes are being delivered, so I'd mentioned some outcomes previously around sort of good relations or relational, but also to say that again referring to the planned interventions programme, 96% of participants showed increased confidence, and 93% felt that they'd learned new skills. So there is an element of that. It is a holistic approach for the programmes.
Do we feel like, I'll say this, but public services, I think, are at breaking point. I think the budgetary position in Northern Ireland is leading to, we're hearing all these significant cuts. Philip, as chair of the Economy Committee, will say that the Chancellor of Queen's, has talked about, the cuts to higher education. Do we see all of these issues impacting on this issue? Like, can we somehow suggest that by not investing in our public services in a way, we're going to actually see more of this rather than less? And what do we need to do as a government collectively, in each department, to recognise that if we don't start investing in services, then this issue is only going to get worse?
And just from a statistical point of view, just to say that with the planned intervention programme, it's nearly 1 in 10 of participants would have been excluded from school. So that's an indication of what can lead to some of these issues. So it's definitely
and are are the other departments hearing that?
Yeah, I mean, well, again, it'll all be reported through the Good Relations Programme Board, but that would be from a good relations standpoint. Then, as you say, there's the wider linkage to the executive.
And how's the executive office, I suppose, leading with the other departments in addressing this? Because to me that would be my expectation, that the executive office provides that overarching connection between the various departments, and ultimately to address this issue. But it's about feeding into what Department of Education is doing, what Department of Economy is doing, communities, every single one of them. Are they leading on that, or is it just another siloed department and this issue will just continue?
I'd say, I mean, it's probably, I mean, these are issues that will come up to at executive level. From myself, the focus is on ensuring the programmes are being delivered in the best possible way they can be, and that the evidence is there to hopefully inform those wider discussions.
I know, but again, that's what we always hear, high level. We never hear how kind of actually has an outcome on the ground. And maybe you can't answer this. Maybe it's a question for the First and the Deputy First Minister in respect of that. But I suppose I'm just frustrated that as a department, you're trying to address an issue, but ultimately it's every other department's job to address it. And how do we bring that all together?
Well, I mean, just from my point of view, I mean, as I would say, the TBOC strategy is multi-agency. I do accept the point. And it's incumbent upon all of us as officials to work harder to ensure that those linkages are made, and that we just keep working at that. You're totally correct. None of these problems can be solved alone by the Executive Office or by any of the other departments individually. A number of these programmes that we've mentioned are delivered in partnership with other departments. The engagement that I've had with them and with the Education Authority gives me a lot of positivity. Everyone's working as hard as they can on them. But yeah, I agree. There's always going to be more that we can do there.
Positivity on the ground. The working relationships, to me, I take for granted because it's one government. But in terms of the outcomes of that, I suppose my biggest frustration is do we have an outcome measure here? An outcomes-based accountability measure here?
I think one of the challenges is, yes, we will, these issues, I mean, if you talk about public services, there are issues right across the board. They're not unique to this particular area. And, arguably you could say they have an impact in multiple areas, and it is something at a sort of society level that is a real challenge. And yes, we do, the departments are all linked in through our structures. They work very closely with us, but, there are sort of constraints in terms of individual departments' remits. So yes, whilst we can raise things, there are some things we can't control what is done, and there will be decisions within individual departments that, there may be budgetary constraints, there may be other things that we won't be tuned into that could have an impact. But, under the likes of the refugee integration strategy, I mean, one of the areas that we're planning to take forward for this year is around ESOL provision and, preparing for employment, particularly for people that get to that sort of 14 to 16 year age group. So, from our TEO's perspective, we've convened a task and finish group where we're bringing the likes of the Department for Economy, Education, the Department for Communities around the table to say, well, rather than you going off and doing that and you get off and doing that, what collectively could we do? Now, I'm not saying that we will be able to do everything that we might want to, but is there a better way of trying to tackle some of this? So that is where we very much see our role, because we don't necessarily hold the levers that can change some of these, but we can convene those discussions and try and get something that maybe tries a slightly different approach, and where we're maybe able to draw in some of the funding that we get from UKG to target some of these things, we will try to do that. So it's just to give you some level of assurance we do that, but there are other things at play that can impact in terms of where we end up.
Yeah, no, look, I appreciate that, but I think there lies the problem in terms of being able to genuinely tackle these issues, is that we do have a very disjointed government department, and it's not my remit, it's not my problem, and I've heard that for the number of years that I've been in MLA, and I think that we need to do better, because I appreciate what you're saying, we could say that to every issue, but this is the issue we're talking about, and this is the one that is causing quite severe consequences on the streets of Northern Ireland, and if we really want to tackle it, they need to start working together in a way that's actually meaningful. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Timothy, please.
If anybody living in a working class area was to tune in and listen to this session from the TEO committee, I firmly believe they'll think that this is an evidence session detached from reality and devoid of what's happening on the ground. So, violence is wrong. What we've seen in our streets was wrong. At the start of the evidence you've submitted, you rightfully acknowledge that this was in response to the attack on Stephen Ogilvie. But we haven't talked about the elephant in the room at all, which is the problems within our communities and why there is this festering, and why there is this tension building. And that is purely because of illegal and uncontrolled immigration. And indeed, if I'll go one step forward, it's also about no integration, or a lack of integration. So what we've heard here is the establishment speak of incidents have happened, oh yes, we're doing something, we're getting to the nub of the issue, we're going to turn this around. But see, unless you start dealing with that issue, strategies are strategies, fluffy words are fluffy words, and it's not going to make a difference to why communities are feeling the way they're feeling. We're always being reactive instead of proactive. So let's go back and look at what happened on the 8th of June, where we had the attempted beheading of a man on the streets in North Belfast. That was an individual that went from Sudan to France, from France to Dublin, got into Dublin and was able to travel via bus across our porous border into Northern Ireland and then claim asylum. When are we going to look at what's happening on the border? When are we going to close that gateway into the UK for those to claim asylum? Because once somebody does come in and claim asylum, free education, free health, free housing, benefits. These are the issues that people on the ground are talking about. They're not talking about strategies and things that the TEO office is doing. So I want to know from the TEO office, what are we doing to actually get to the nub of the problem and stop this happening in the first place? This is the 3rd year that this has happened. And we can throw 400,000 here, 500,000 there in reactive mode, as we always do. But when are we going to start looking at border force? So you're going to tell me immigration isn't a stormont issue, but yet we spend £5 million a year in issues related to it. So when I raised this with the Justice Minister yesterday, it's almost as if wash the hands, that's a border force issue. When there's criminal activity taking place, the police have a responsibility. We had the Migrants' Rights Network here a number of weeks ago, so they were complaining, how dare anybody carry out immigration raids, and that's their terms, when they increased by 76%, arrests increased by 169%. So there's an obvious problem with people coming into Northern Ireland illegally. And until we start doing something about that, we're going to continue to go around the merry-go-round. So tell me from the Executive Office, what conversations has there been between the First Minister and Deputy First Minister and the UK Government? What conversations are happening with Border Force? How many buses have been stopped coming from Dublin? Because that's what I want to hear about. It's not about the reactionary programmes that you're talking to us about today.
And Timothy, I do appreciate you're not going to like what I'm going to say, but you know, I have no remit in terms of, you know, who is allowed to come here, how they travel here, how, you know, that is all managed. That does very firmly sit with UK government. Now, FM and DFM do engage with their counterparts in Westminster, and you know, they have raised concerns, particularly in light of the unrest around the impact here. But unfortunately, I can't answer your question around, you know, the enforcement immigration policy, because I just don't have a remit in that. All we can do is continue to engage with Westminster on the impact of the issues. And you rightly point out there are concerns within communities and there are tensions there. And yes, that I agree that is something that we need to be able to have those conversations, to listen to those concerns, to understand those concerns, so that we can again be feeding that back into those wider discussions. But I don't have any remit or any control in regards to the wider immigration policy and who comes here.
There has to be a realisation that this is a cultural problem that we're experiencing. And when Jim raised the issue of an alien culture, which the attempted beheading of somebody in our streets in Northern Ireland is indeed an alien culture. How dare, you know, use such language? But that's the reality of what we're seeing on our streets. There's a cultural problem where I've raised it last year, raised it this year again. When the Roma community came into Ballymena, there's no integration. They took over an area in Ballymena on the doorstep of the police station, and it seemed to be that the statutory agencies were only interested when there was trouble, and once the trouble disappears and disseminates and goes back to normal, well then the focus essentially moves on, life moves on. The same problems exist, and unless we start talking about these issues, we'll be talking about them next year, the year after, and the year after that. So at what point are we going to hear from the TU office of what exactly is happening between TU and the British government to put a stop to this? How many buses are being stopped? How are we stopping people entering the UK illegally through the porous border? And unless we start talking about things like that, we're going to continue to have this problem. And it's sad because there's so many people come to Northern Ireland to improve their life. They work hard. I look at Wrightbus, I look at Cranswick, I look at Moy Park. So many of my industries, or our industries in Northampton, that depend on foreign labour coming in to take up them jobs. And it's because of the issues, a small number of people that we are not dealing with. People arriving into the UK in boats, and people see that on their screens. People arriving into Dublin, coming into Northern Ireland unchecked, claiming asylum, getting all the benefits of the day. And unless we start dealing with them things, I'm sorry, that you can have as many strategies and as glossy documents as you want, but it's not going to make a difference.
And I take your point, Timothy, but I mean, all I can say is that I don't have a remit in that respect. And yes, there will be engagement with Home Office, and ministers do regularly engage, but we are not a decision maker and we don't have control over the policies around immigration.
Okay. Do you want another question, or do you want to move on?
Move on.
Okay, thank you. Philip, please.
Chair and colleagues, thank you for for your work. So I just wanted to check, so in the week of the incident that took place in my constituency, so that took place on the Monday, and then on the Tuesday, and the first incident then started taking place on the Wednesday. So when I was then out on the ground trying to restore calm in my constituency, the groups that I was supporting and working with in terms of youth providers were then receiving emails from TU officials telling them that TBUC camps weren't going ahead. Who thought it was a good idea to send out emails at 9 o'clock at night while parts of my constituency were burning?
Yeah, I mean, just on that point, the TBUC camps programme and planned intervention programmes are delivered in partnership, so there's not emails from ourselves. It doesn't work directly in that context, but it's just through partners.
But we thought it was a good idea to send out emails at 9 o'clock at night.
You know, and certainly we'll check through the process. As I say, it wouldn't have been from ourselves, but we'll just check through the process of how that happened and make sure, you know, there's learning there.
I just want to pick up then on the organisation and groups that meet. So the council engagement group. So I see an organisation on that is veiled in secrecy, and from my perspective, is a cause of some of the major issues that continue to plague in my community, and that's mayors who come in and take over properties, either leave them in an unfit or uninhabitable state, or then go to a position where they then rent out their property to the Home Office ahead of the needs of people who've been on the housing waiting list for many years. So I just want to check in relation to mayors, do they attend on how often does this group meet? Because we as a committee have tried to summons mayors before this committee on a number of occasions and have been unable to get them, but it seems that you meet them on a regular basis.
Yeah, the council engagement group was originally councils only, and actually they thought it would be beneficial to have some of the other statutory partners around there, and given the role that mayors plays, they had asked for mayors to be there, and I don't have the data in front of me of how often they have attended meetings, but I can certainly check that for you.
Do you attend those council engagement?
TEO does, not me personally, but members of my team would be at those.
Were mayors at the last meeting?
I don't know off the top of my head. I don't have the minutes in front of me to check.
Just given the role that they play in Northern Ireland, it would be useful to try and ascertain that. And I just want to, Paul, I'm just going to close this a second. Then just in relation to the response fund, so that's £500,000. Is that new funding that's been allocated?
Yeah, so that's an additional 500,000, and as I say, that's in three main delivery mechanisms at the moment: the RAPID programme that I mentioned, interventions through councils, and communities in transition work.
Okay. So on point 3, it says support actions to build and rebuild community cohesion in the areas that most in need. So if you could just go into some detail on that, would be useful.
Yeah, so I mean, it's probably in the three mechanisms that we mentioned. So I'd mentioned the RAPID programme earlier with EA and the model that they're developing, and it's based on the work with the universities. But in addition to that response, there's also then a debrief element, where an element of the fund would be directed towards debrief activities. With the council interventions, we're working with the councils to ascertain what specifics that will entail. I'll talk a little bit about one that came out last year in response to the disorder that occurred then. I might give an indication of what future work will look like. And then the CIT work is just very much a continuation of some of the programming.
I'm just trying to ascertain, so this is new money, so not programmes for last year, but CIT doesn't operate in the vast majority of areas in which we experience the most difficulties.
Maybe I can come in on some of them, Gavin. So part of the community cohesion group that existed and that was developing those longer term interventions did repurpose to start to look at, okay, well, look, what do we need to try and develop that sort of community confidence piece in the short term? So the group, which has numerous agencies and departments on it, but also has some of the voluntary sector organisations.
This is just the response fund I'm talking about.
Yeah, but what they're doing is they have been identifying things that might help in terms of that community cohesion, community confidence space, and some of the things are around some integration work in some of these communities, some shared cultural activity type things. So that will be helping inform where some of that money goes, but it will be through other mechanisms. There are things around one of the issues that come up was people actually don't feel safe to come back into their homes, and there are concerns there. So, how do we address that? What is there locally to support that, and how do we make sure people are aware of that? So there are things that are being sort of proposed through that community cohesion group, which it'll only be a part of that, but it will help shape that response fund in terms of how it's used.
So none of it's been allocated at the moment?
Just on terms of CIT, and Paul, your point of where it had been located, so the initial funding there is North Belfast, South Belfast and Carrickfergus.
Yeah, but CIT doesn't operate in North Belfast. What it operates in is in New Lodge, with areas of a tiny bit that goes into Tigers Bay. It's called an area of influence, and then operates in the Shankill. So it doesn't operate in North Belfast. It operates in West Belfast and in one section of North Belfast.
CIT will be one of the delivery mechanisms.
Right, so 500,000, it's been spent or it hasn't been spent?
No, it hasn't. No, it hasn't been spent.
Okay, so we can organise community cohesion event, if that's what you want to call it, where everyone comes together and we celebrate everything that's great about each other, right? That's not going to change a single thing on the ground in North Belfast. The vast majority of people who are going to take part in those events are already really well integrated into North Belfast and our society. We have ethnic minorities from right across North Belfast who have been there many years and play a positive role in our football clubs and our businesses, etc. The main issue of concern in my community is the fact that we have continued growth in houses of multiple occupancy, typically from people from multiple males, from more than one family, who then come into a particular area and engage in the most ridiculous antisocial behaviour. People who live on either side of them have spent their entire lives working to buy their homes, and the impact that they're felt is not going to be removed by us all coming together and celebrating things. That's not good. So if I can give some suggestions about what the money might want to be used for, so we might want to provide some additional funding to councils to investigate and take enforcement action against HMOs. We might want to give some additional funding to councils to investigate breaches of planning permission operated by mayors, where they come in, swoop up and purchase homes or rent homes in working class communities in North Belfast. They then don't get planning permission for them and convert kitchens and convert bathrooms into bedrooms and destroy local communities. So that's where I think your focus should be on, rather than bringing everyone together in a leisure centre to dance around and say how great everything is. That will make a real difference. Any of this other stuff will just have us back where we are next year.
We'll certainly take that into consideration. We are, one of the delivery elements will be with councils, so it's not just CIT. So.
Okay, thank you. Very conscious, Colin, that you've come to committee. You've probably done a lot of preparation for it. Is there anything you'd like to add to the session?
Just my role is substantially different from those of both Orla and Gavin here. So they are absolutely focused on the policy and then the delivery of funding and intervention programmes, whereas mine is an oversight of the doctrine around emergency management, crisis response. So, to be fair, the questions from committee today haven't really focused on that. And I'd be happy enough to come back and talk to committee another time about the civil contingencies approach generally, if that's something you'd be interested in doing. But the question hasn't focused on that today.
No, it's more just in case you've thought, gosh,
no.
That's something I would like to add.
I will come in if there's something.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, that's us for today. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, members, so that's the end of Hansard coverage. Are we content to take a 5-minute comfort break?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, just going to close session. Thank you.
Committee Room 30. Sound. 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 Committee Room 30, 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 Sound.
Okay, thank you. So, members, we're just back in open session again, and we're going to move on to our next item, which is an oral briefing from RAISE in terms of Ending Violence Against Women and Girls Committee Inquiry Scoping Paper. And I'm going to refer you to pages 54 to 57 of the pack for the clerk's brief, pages 58 to 122 for a copy of the RAISE Scoping Paper, and pages 174 to 175 of the pack for the correspondence from the department advising that the first study on attitudes amongst young men would be published in the autumn. So I'm going to welcome to the meeting Annabelle Reid, Senior Research Officer, and then Catherine Barr, Research Officer. So thank you so much, ladies, for your work on the research paper. I wonder, could you just speak to it, and thank you for supplying it in advance.
Good afternoon, Chair and members. Just to introduce myself, I'm Catherine Barr, working in RAISE on equality and social justice issues, including violence against women and girls. So the scoping paper is intended to help support the committee in considering potential issues for a possible inquiry into VOG, but we understand that the committee's legislative workload may have recently changed, and that may limit the scope for a full inquiry. Throughout the document and summarised in the initial key points section, we've highlighted areas the committee may wish to consider further. I would flag that this is an initial scoping paper and is therefore quite high level in parts, so the committee can decide which direction it might want to go down. So just to caveat it all, that further research may be required to provide the committee with full details on any particular issue. I'll be taking you through the relevant policy and funding landscape, and then Annabelle will outline the data and some issues the committee's already identified in the strategic planning session as being of particular interest. So as members will know, violence against women and girls is a priority in the Executive's programme for government and a matter of concern across the Assembly. The Ending Violence Against Women and Girls Strategic Framework, EVOG, was agreed in 2024 as a cross-executive strategy led by TEO. The second delivery plan has now been published, and it's worth noting that within that, an interim review of the strategy is due to take place. I think it's probably important to emphasise that the framework is aimed at tackling the root causes of VOG. The scoping paper sets out some of the activities taken forward to date, and we understand the department's been in touch with you in writing and in person, so I won't dwell on those too much now. We've primarily focused in the paper on the work of TEO and the EVOG framework, but clearly there's lots of work being done by other departments and bodies that are relevant to violence against women and girls. So of particular note is the Domestic and Sexual Abuse Strategy led by the Department of Health and Department of Justice, which is more focused on those particular crimes and support for victims. There's been some form of strategy or action plan or something on domestic and sexual abuse since around the mid-2000s. But that strategy is focused on all victims, not just women and girls. There's also a link with work being led by the Department of Queer Communities in relation to the Gender Equality Strategy, although a draft Gender Equality Strategy hasn't been published yet. The EVOG strategic framework sets out a range of monitoring and accountability measures, including an oversight and programme board and engagement with external stakeholders on particular issues. The committee might want to consider how all of the work related to VOG is being coordinated and monitored, both under that EVOG strategic framework umbrella, but also the wider stuff. How is duplication being avoided, and are there any gaps? Many of TEO's materials include the strapline that there's something everyone can do in relation to EVOG. it might be helpful to consider to what extent the current model supports a genuinely whole system approach across government and wider sectors. We've requested information from TEO in relation to their work and the work of other departments, which we understand is being collated. We can provide the committee with an overview of that when we receive it. The scoping paper refers to other neighbouring jurisdictions and their strategic approaches to VOG. So, as well as their own specific strategies, there are some particular legal and institutional frameworks focused on VOG. For example, in England and Wales, there are statutory duties in relation to developing relevant strategies at local and, in the case of Wales, national level. In the Republic of Ireland, CUN is a standalone statutory agency responsible for coordinating implementation in relation to domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. So the committee may wish to consider what lessons can be learnt from all of those different approaches. Alongside the policy landscape, it's important to consider what funding is available. In response to an Assembly question, TEO stated that from 21-22 to 25-26, they had spent 13.6 million on the EVOG programme, of which just under 5.5 million had been in grants and 5.3 million in staffing. In 25-26, 2 million was initially ring-fenced for the EVOG strategy, but this went up following monitoring rounds. The draft budget proposed and consulted on by the Finance Minister included continued ring-fence funding, which would rise to 5.8 million in 28-29, although as members know that hasn't been agreed. But there's other areas of the budget that will impact on VOG, so funding for the PSNI and discretionary departmental budgets. The delivery plans for the domestic and sexual abuse strategy had some costings, but not all the costings, not all the actions had costings beside them. The UK recently underwent a baseline evaluation of how well it was meeting the requirements of the Istanbul Convention, which is a Council of Europe treaty which focuses on VOG and domestic abuse. This evaluation noted that there's no comprehensive overview of the funding for VOG in the UK and raised concerns at a lack of funding for services for women and girls who experience violence. The committee may want to consider whether there is sufficient funding for addressing issues to do with VOG, from the preventative stage right through to supporting victims, and how all of that's being coordinated. Can total public expenditure on EVOG be identified across all the different departments and programmes? It's worth noting that recent inquiries from the National Audit Office and the House of Commons Home Affairs Committee have raised concerns about the lack of overarching oversight of government funding to tackle VOG in England and Wales. So, and then looking beyond neighbouring jurisdictions, the strategic framework document refers to a range of international human rights standards of relevance to VOG. The committee may want to consider to what extent the approaches taken in Northern Ireland are meeting those standards. I'll hand over now to Annabelle.
Thanks, Catherine.
Catherine, go ahead, Annabelle.
Yeah, okay. So I'm briefly going to cover two areas from the paper. So the first is the data landscape, and then the second is going to be some of the issues that the committee themselves identified as being of particular interest. So starting with the data, so I suppose the key point really is that there's no single measure of violence against women and girls in Northern Ireland. Instead, the evidence kind of draws from a range of different sources, which includes police and justice data, as well as population surveys, research studies and administrative data as well. And I suppose each of these will tell us something different about the issue. So police data will reflect what is reported and what is recorded. Surveys will capture experiences and attitudes. Research provides insight into lived experience. And the service data itself will show, I suppose, demand for support. Taken together, they will provide a broad but partial picture. And the department themselves have indicated that a dashboard is in development that will bring together some of these key measures. Now, they haven't given us a definitive date from when that dashboard will be available, but they have earmarked for autumn 2026. I suppose the more important scrutiny point for the committee is how that data will actually support scrutiny. The paper highlights that a number of limitations that members may wish to consider further. So the first is fragmentation and comparability. So the data is held across multiple systems using different definitions, making it difficult to compare across data sets or over time. There's also the issue of underreporting. So many forms of violence, particularly coercive control, psychological abuse and online harms, might not be captured in official data, and there will be gaps. So there's limited information on issues such as repeat victimisation, intersectionality and differences between groups as well. So in that context, members may wish to consider whether the current evidence base is sufficiently coherent to monitor progress under the strategic framework, and also they'd like to know what progress has been made on that proposed dashboard, and how well the current data will capture those hidden harms and the experiences of different groups. So I'll turn now to the issues of particular interest to the committee, which were identified in earlier discussions that you've had yourself, and we've reflected in the paper as well. So the first of this is the underlying causes, attitudes and misogyny. So the strategic framework places a strong emphasis, as Catherine actually discussed as well, on root causes, highlighting the role of misogyny and harmful online content and the need for attitudinal change. So members may wish to note that there is emerging evidence in this development. As we've heard, TEO do have commissioned work on the attitudes of men and boys, but it's also worth noting that the Women's and Equalities Committee in the House of Commons are due to publish their findings and recommendations from an inquiry into misogyny and the manosphere, and also here in the Assembly, the Youth Assembly have indicated that they'll look at this issue as well. So in light of that evidence that will be coming, members may wish to consider how responsive the strategy is to emerging issues. So the paper also discusses adverse childhood experiences, known as ACE, including exposure to domestic violence as a significant risk factor. It notes evidence of a strong association between a higher ACE score and later experiences of violence. So the strategic framework is intended to take a trauma-informed approach, so members may wish to consider how effectively the framework is addressing prevention and early intervention. Finally, children and young people are a key focus of the strategic framework, and this includes work on healthy relationships, education and youth engagement. Members may wish to consider how effectively the framework is engaging children and young people, including through collaboration with the Department of Education. And there is a specific action in the delivery plan, so it might be worth the committee asking further with DO officials how that actually will be played out. Finally, I suppose the paper is intended to support the committee in considering whether and how it may wish to take this work forward. So, as Catherine mentioned, there might not be scope for a full inquiry, but I suppose members may wish to consider, are there other alternative approaches to gathering evidence? For example, a roundtable session with key organisations involved in delivery and funding of EVOG related work. That might provide an opportunity to explore some of the issues identified in this paper in a more focused way. So, Chair, that concludes our remarks, and we're happy to take any questions.
Okay, well, thank you. Really appreciate the paper. It's really good to have it all set out in that one document. Really appreciate that. I suppose one of the phrases that jumped out at me there when you were speaking, Catherine, it was around the gender equality strategy. Do you remember that? And the amount of work that went into it in terms of, again, roundtables, the consultation and stuff. And I just wonder, to what degree do you think that the absence of the gender equality strategy and other sort of delays in actually getting some policy papers through are having an impact in terms of addressing end of violence against women and girls? Is that something?
So the strategic framework refers to historic inequalities as being a root cause of EVOG, I suppose, in terms of how the work's being shared out now in the absence of the gender equality strategy is maybe something that could be checked with the department, what work TO's maybe been able to pick up that it would be doing anyway under gender equality strategy, because I suppose that's where some of it can sometimes be a bit confusing from the outside of all these different strategies. If there was a gender equality strategy, what would TO be doing anyway, and how that all fits together could perhaps be a bit clearer.
Okay, I suppose the other aspect when we were discussing this at our strategy day was that there is substantial, and some would say not enough, but there is substantial public money has been sent to organisations and community groups for either the regional or local change fund, and then other pieces of work. And I suppose from my point of view, I think our scrutiny work would be looking at the root causes and the impact of that. And I'm just wondering, to what degree did you pick up in the research around the effectiveness to date of the interventions and the programmes that we've seen coming through the strategic framework?
There was some initial evaluations done of some of the work, and there's figures to that effect in the inquiry paper. I think we were hoping to have some more information on that from TO to inform this paper, but didn't have it. If we get anything, we will send that through. There's also the interim review coming up likely next year, which should look at that. but I suppose it would be important to highlight that with this being such a systemic issue, attitudes, and it's maybe linked to some of what was said in the panel before, attitudes aren't going to change overnight. It may be helpful to better understand how the strategy will measure success and what does that look like in 5 years' time, because we might, if it's working, we might see reporting going up and figures around things like domestic abuse and sexual abuse reporting going up. So to understand what does success look like in 5 years and 10 years and 20 years might be helpful.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Sinead, did you want to turn your camera on? Yes, go ahead, Sinead, thank you.
Hi, thank you very much. I think this is a really helpful paper, actually. And I suppose it really maybe pulls out the lack of funding, but apart from the lack of funding, when you look at where the money has been spent from TEO's perspective, a lot of it has been around staffing and operational costs. You know, it kind of goes to about 1.7 million out of 3.5 million or whatever last year. So, you know, there's not an awful lot of kind of outputs there. And then the other thing that I thought was quite interesting, obviously, it's how we collect the data as well, and how we maybe map what other organisations are actually doing and feeding that into that data, and that's not very clear as well. But also the lack of statutory obligation that other jurisdictions are obliged to do. Can you talk a wee bit just more about those findings?
About the other jurisdictions?
Yes. You mentioned about statutory obligations in,
yes,
I think you said the Republic of Ireland or somewhere.
So it's across, certainly. So in the UK government have pointed to the Victims and Prisoners Act 2024. So there was a duty to collaborate within that, which hasn't been commenced yet, but would require relevant authorities to collaborate on the provision or commissioning of services, including for domestic abuse and sexual misconduct. There's also the Domestic Abuse Act, which requires really local authorities to work at a local level. You know, I suppose the councils in England and Wales would have more authority over things like health and related to justice issues and so on. So to work together and report annually on that. In Wales, back in 2015, there was the Violence Against Women, Domestic Abuse and Sexual Violence Wales Act. So that required national and local strategies to be produced for tackling gender-based violence, domestic abuse and sexual violence. And there also has to be a national advisor to tackle violence against women, so they advise the government. In the Republic of Ireland, so a separate statutory organisation, CUN, has been set up in January 24. So it has a number of different roles, but one of them is a coordinating function, so it's coordinating their equivalent strategy. They're the ones who organise the funding and award that. They set national service standards, and they also take a lead on research and data development. So before that, it was maybe a bit more like ourselves, where responsibility was set up across different departments and different agencies.
Yeah, I'm sorry, just to come in. Sorry,
go ahead.
Just to come in on that data point about there is work, I should flag, ongoing across kind of the UK statistical system on developing guidance on more consistent data collection, and that's across all jurisdictions on this island. So that will be helpful. But I suppose the question is, how far has that come along, or can we get any timelines from the department on you know, when we'll make progress with that?
Yeah, well, that's very helpful, and I think just the paper itself is useful for us as we kind of look at our forward work plan and maybe what we can do within the committee. So thank you very much.
Any other questions from members? Go ahead, please, Timothy.
A couple of things I suppose I wanted to pick up on. It was an area, so when we look at the local change funds and the percentage outcomes, so 88% increased knowledge of EBOG, 81% improved understanding of healthy relationships, and 85% felt more confidence in helping. I still have a concern through the grants that are going out through the local change fund that we're actually making a difference in reaching the people that we need to reach. I have this bugbear with TEO that with these pots of money, and we always give it to other people to give out, It's almost as if, well, we're doing something about it, here's X amount of million. So in the draft budget we have, was it 3.6 million for this year, and obviously this is ring fence for the executive. Then it goes up to 5.8 million in 27-28, 5.8 million in 28-29. Sounds good, but what is that delivering on the ground? What are we doing to change the habits? And I go back to the point where I do believe that we need to go into justice and the police. That's where the money should be spent, and as well as that in education. So the Young Lives and Times survey that's listed within the paper, if you look down through some of the percentages that's there, something that comes out to me very strongly. So if this is young people, I presume this is either people at school or university maybe taking part in this. Yes, we online social media platforms, we recognise that's where everybody is vulnerable, politicians, females, whoever, that's where we're going to get the most amount of abuse. But if you look at it, public transport is number 3, and if I mind rightly, from a number of weeks ago, I think it was yourself, Deborah, that raised it, when it came to the Department of Infrastructure, was there any spend at all?
No.
By them? So we're giving this money out to councils, whereas we haven't got our own house in order, first of all. So we have public transport is very high on it. Then we have listed on it schools, further and higher educations and universities. So that's something that sits within our own control again. And I genuinely think that we'd be better focusing on what we can do as a Stormont body, as Stormont PLC, the executive, to try and change it. And if you look at our correspondence this week, there's 2 letters from 2 parents in 9-10 and 9-11. I'll speak to them when they come, as concerns about what their child has experienced within the school setting. We had the youth assembly came here the last mandate, of them when they were in the final throes, gave us a presentation of what they experienced in school. And I think, as much as there's probably really good work done on the ground and some of the change funds and the money that's been spent, I still think there's a better use of targeting within having more police officers, more female police officers, and as well as that within the education system, that we are delivering this at a young age to change behaviours then. Once behaviours are learned and people get older, it's harder to change and have that impact. Whereas if this is generational, the biggest opportunity you have to change that is within the school setting, and I think some of the details and data that you have provided us with points to that.
Yeah, so I suppose just to note, we did ask for I suppose a breakdown of participants from like projects and schemes that have been funded. That was being collated, but we just didn't have it at time. So I think it's something that we'll definitely make sure, we'll make a note that when it comes through, we'll summarise that.
And it might just, in case helpful, I understand that there's working groups set up with external stakeholders. So one's focused on higher education, includes the universities, and there's one something along the lines of safer nights out, sort of hospitality, and I think TransLink sits on that group, so it might be something again that's worth speaking to the department about. Is what I think there is engagement ongoing, but what the outcomes of that are maybe something worth looking into.
Another of the very helpful graphs that's contained within is recorded domestic abuse incidents and crime rates. So they've increased over time. When we go back to 2004-2005, where you have crime sitting, is it 6 per thousand, and then you have 12 per thousand in the instance.
Sorry, what chart is that?
That is page 14 of the briefing paper. And then it comes to this position in 22-23, where the crimes almost have doubled, and with the incidents have spiked as well. It'd be interesting to understand, is that more people coming forward? And obviously what we've seen the last 2 weeks is that heinous crimes are carried out on victims, and it takes them a number of years before they feel confident to come forward and give the details of what exactly has happened. And sort of thinking to myself, is it more that there's a confidence, or is it an increase in activities happening, incidents happening, crimes happening throughout them years?
I think it will be a mix of those factors, to be honest. I think so. We're going to have more crimes being reported. Now, interested enough, I don't know actually if there's any data on historical crimes, or, and the like. I don't know that. So I think it'll be a mix of more crimes being reported, and then obviously through initiatives, maybe there is more encouragement for people to come forward as well. So it will definitely be a mix.
And the money that's being spent, do you get a sense and a feeling that we have more support in place now than we did have back in 2004, 2005, when the data goes back to? It's one thing coming forward and reporting what's happened, but it's then making sure we have the support infrastructure around people that have been victim to crime, to the help that they need.
Now, there is a survey question about access and awareness of, how to report a crime, and then access to services. Funnily enough, that will be reported. Those questions are going to be repeated. So we will have actually a bit of a benchmark to compare to. So that's, once again, is due in the autumn. I think that's the Young Life and Time survey will be repeated. So we might have something more for you probably in the autumn to compare against.
Obviously, the inquiry that we were considering carrying out might change with somebody's PMB that has dropped into our inbox, but I certainly think there is some scope that the committee looks at this in more detail, and if we can't in this mandate, it's certainly coming back in the next, because we're investing the money. It needs to be spent. I'm not saying we shouldn't invest that money. I'm in agreement that we do need to invest this money to tackle the scourge that is on society, but it's just making sure it's going to the most appropriate place, it's making a difference, and I fully believe that if we're going to change this, it needs to start early on in life, and it needs to start in our education system.
Okay, well, thank you, ladies. I suppose there's an action from the paper, and that was some of the recommendations of areas for us to investigate, and I just wonder would the committee team spend some time maybe saying about how they could actually be distilled into questions for the department. It's sort of as an early, some of the stuff was, was really very practical recommendations for action and follow-up, so maybe that's just as a starter then. Okay, ladies, thank you very much. Thanks. Okay, so is there any other actions from that clerk, please?
There's some pieces of data that were referenced that may be coming forward in due course, so we'll chase up with the researchers in terms of completing the picture on that data.
Okay, well, thank you. So I'm just going to advise then, as I think Timothy's just alluded to, Claire Sugden has introduced the Age Discrimination Goods, Facilities and Services Bill, and so should the bill pass in the Assembly, it will be referred to this committee for scrutiny. Therefore, it would not be possible to undertake an inquiry, as primary legislation will take priority in our committee's forward work programme. So just to seek your agreement, if Claire's bill is referred to the committee in the autumn, and there is insufficient time to consider the bill and conduct an inquiry, the committee will hold a roundtable event with recipients of local and regional change funding before March 2027 to assess the impact of the funding, the intention being that a report will be produced of the event, published online and forwarded to you, and also, as Timothy had also suggested there, be incorporated into our committee report, legacy report for the next TU committee. Are people content with that? Wait, Anya, you content with that? Yeah. Okay, so members, I'm going to move on there to item 8. So SL1, the Salaries, Public Services Ombudsman Order, Northern Ireland 2026. I'm going to refer you to pages 124 to 125 of your pack for the clerk's brief, and pages 126 to 133 of the pack for a copy of the SL1 and a copy of the proposed statutory rule. So just a reminder that the committee noted receipt of the SL1 and the proposed statutory rule at our meeting on Wednesday 10th of June 2026, at which point a call for views was published on the Assembly's website. The committee agreed that it did not require any written or oral evidence from the Assembly Commission, the Audit Committee nor NIPSO in relation to the proposed statutory rule. The committee's call for evidence closed on the 23rd of June. No responses were received and no issues have been identified with the drafting nor policy intent of the proposed statutory rule. So does anybody have any questions, or are you content for me just to ask the Senior Assistant Clerk to come forward? Is that yourself, Aoife? Thank you. All of a sudden I was thinking, what's everybody's job title there?
No, I don't have much to add other than what you've said. But basically, there was no responses to the call for views. and we didn't identify anything else in the SL1 or the statutory rule, the draft statutory rule, that just kind of calls for concern.
Well, that's comforting. Thank you. Okay, any questions for Aoife about this? No. Okay, thank you very much for your work on that. Okay, members, so if we're satisfied then that we have all the information we need, that it should proceed to make our decision. There are three options for the committee. Can decide it is content or not content for the Assembly Commission to proceed to make the rule, or it can decide that it is content for Assembly Commission to proceed to make the rule subject to any issues being addressed, and I don't think there are any issues. So are we just content with option 1 then? Yeah, okay. Good job. Okay, that's fine. Okay, moving on to correspondence, members. So I'm going to refer you to pages 136 to 140 of your pack for a summary of the committee correspondence. I'm going to draw your attention to a number of items. 9.4, Google Minds and violence against women and girls. I'm going to refer you to pages 161 to 163 of the pack. Just to advise that the committee received a response from Google Minds to the committee's correspondence of the 10th of June 2026 in relation to EVOG and the Small Business Research Initiative. Google Minds, with support secured through TO's EVOG Small Business Research Challenge, has developed AVA, an AI-powered training simulation platform that prepares frontline professionals to recognise, respond to and safely handle disclosures of domestic abuse and gender-based violence while generating real-time data to better target prevention, protection and support services. So just to remind that the committee agreed to write to the recipients of the Small Business Research Initiative to ask about innovative ways in which recipients are utilising this funding to support the safety of women and girls. The committee awaits responses from the other three recipients. So I'm going to seek your agreement to write to the department asking for further information on what organisations are piloting AVA or have plans to pilot in Northern Ireland as part of its funding given to Google Minds. So sounds very good, but I would like more information around output, who's involved, who's accessing it, whether it's money well spent. So content to write? Okay. 9.6 TO, demographics of victims and survivors. I'm just going to refer you to pages 165 to 166 of the meeting pack. So the committee has received a response from the departments to the committee's correspondence of the 4th of June 2026 asking whether any resources could be made available to community and voluntary services. Is that CBS? Okay, sorry, the Commission for Victims and Survivors to support research into the demographics of victims and survivors in Northern Ireland, or whether TO has any plans to commission such research that groups could access. The Department has advised that officials continue to liaise with CVS as they work to finalise the scope of their proposed research and to determine the associated resource requirements. Once this is further developed, if required, consideration will then be given to the provision of additional resources to support this research subject to budgetary availability. So just going to seek your agreement to note this item and agree to write to the department asking that they keep our committee updated on the official engagement between TO and CVS once final proposals are developed. Agreed? Yep. Okay, 9.8 and 9.25, First and Deputy First Minister and TO and the Irish Language Commissioner. I'm going to refer you to pages 171 to 172 of the meeting pack and pages 132 to 135 of the table pack. So the committee has received responses from the First and Deputy First Ministers and the Department to the committee's correspondence of the 8th of May and 29th of June of this year. In relation to legal fees to date for the Irish Language Commissioner, TO was advised that the total legal costs incurred to date are £6,992.89 with a breakdown provided across 2025-26 and 26-27 within the correspondence. So I'm just going to seek your agreement to note these items. Okay, go ahead.
If we could read into the record, the breakdown of them costs essentially are consultation and advice regarding Grand Central Station signage case, which the Irish Language Commissioner had no business in getting involved in. He spent £1,219 and 99p on, and the other one I find that his I would like more detail, but I can do that in my role as an MLA. The FOI advice that he received cost £274.50, and he frustrated this committee by not releasing information that we requested, trying to hide behind FOI advice. I would wonder, did he get that advice before or after the committee made that request? And I hope now he's very clear that he cannot hide behind that when this committee asks for advice in future, that he has to be forthcoming with it. He's responsible to this committee, and I hope that when he's wasted nearly £1,500 in legal advice that they essentially had no business doing. So I think we need to keep a watch and brief on what any commissioner is spending the money on in legal fees to ensure that it's proper use of public funds.
Okay, it's noted for the record. So 9.10 to 9.11, so this is around individual correspondence about threatening behaviour towards girls in school. I'm going to refer you to pages 176 to 180. Just advise that the committee has received correspondence from 2 individuals regarding threatening behaviour in the City of Armagh High School. Just going to seek your agreement to note these items and agree to forward the correspondence to the Department of Education to address with the Education Authority as it relates to decisions made by the EA and the Board of Governors at that school. Now, I'm just conscious that you want to come in, or is this something we should maybe go into closed session on? I'm seeking advice here.
I'm not going to say anything that essentially I don't think we need to go into a closed session for.
Okay, well, pause a wee second. So, Deborah, have you any views on
that? It's not a school within my constituency, but it is a school that constituents do attend from within my constituency. And I would just want to make very clear at the start, it's really important we have a school's name here. And recently, you know, schools' names have come up in this committee, and we need to make sure that we're not have any slurs towards the school here in terms of work, because there is policies and procedures that are in place from EA, if we like it or not.
Okay, so that's noted. So I'll bring you in, Timothy, then, and if we do need to go into closed session, then we can.
Certainly, I wasn't going to. I didn't intend naming the school, and if members cast their mind back, I think it was to March, I raised this case previously at committee and concerns I had, and it very much ties in with ending violence against women and girls. Here we have a scenario where this relates to an incident that took place in Armagh in December 2025, where there's a newcomer year 8 pupil made threats to rape and kill another pupil. We are now we are in July, so essentially 8 months on, and these parents feel very dissatisfied with the process, and they feel that we talk about ending violence against women and girls here at this committee, but in reality what they have experienced is that it's words on the page, and there's been no help and no support there for them. And I can understand why they feel let down. Like, this is an Uri and Armagh issue, but it's something the parents came to me about, because they're not getting any headway. And I have wrote to the Education Minister, who isn't going to meet the family. I have wrote to Mr Pengelly, who is the head of the EA, and we are left in a situation where there's a year 8 pupil, a 12-year-old child, is fearful of going back to school in September, because that's when she is going to be confronted with the person that made the threats against her. And we're spending all this money. We're talking about a victim-centred approach, but the parents have told me that the TEO need to explain why the strategy ending violence against women and girls and reality don't match up. So that is their lived experience of the process here. And I get why we're sending it to the EA, but to date, the EA haven't given this family any confidence, where it's always been about talking to the perpetrator and not about bringing in and speaking to the victims in this case, because it involves a number of young girls who, very vulnerable, are very fearful, full of anxiety, and their summer's going to be ruined, because the prospect is coming back in September that they're going to be confronted with this newcomer child that will be going into year 9, and their views haven't been sought and considered. So as a committee, that's why I'm very passionate about that when we're spending money, we need to be looking at spending money in our schools to ensure that women and girls that do attend going to school feel safe to do so. And at the end of the day, we have an incident here where they don't feel safe, they don't feel listened to, and this is a committee that's in charge of ending violence against women and girls, so it's something we need to bear in mind going forward, that we have lived experience. We have 2 parents feeling passionate enough and reaching out for pleas for help, that they're being left in this situation for 7 months. They're going to experience another 2 months of nothing being issued, no help from the school, no help from the EA, and the chances are their only option is to potentially move schools, and I think that is a failing on behalf of the EA towards the victims.
Okay, Deborah, and then Anya, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. This is an awful situation, but I take a slightly different view in terms of which committee should look at this, or which, where the remit sits on this. I have had conversations with this school, and those, I do genuinely believe the school is trying their best in relation to the policies that they have in place. Not they, but EA. They have to work within a framework, and that framework is around expulsion and suspension. Now, in my view, whether the rights and wrongs of that, I think we can all point to different examples, not just in this situation, but all point to examples where that guidance may need reviewed, but that's not for this committee. That is for the that's for Education Department to take forward, and that's not necessarily in our remit. And whilst I understand the correspondence here talks about ending violence against women and girls, again, the policies and procedures relating to this issue sit with the Department of Education, and we have a school here that is really trying their best, given the guidance, given the policies that have been placed upon them from EA. And I think it's unfair to think that support or the school is not trying to do what they can. I think behind the scenes there's work that has been going on here. But I would say that we should make sure that the department does take a look at this. And so I don't think it's for the remit of this committee.
Okay, I'll take some more views. Anya, and then Claire, please.
Yeah, Chair, I think at the start you said we're going to write to the Department of Education on this
and
one.
Also EA, yeah.
And also EA. In terms of EA, could we write directly to the Chief Exec, just to flag it, because some of the content is very alarming. I think we should also copy the Education Committee into this. Obviously they have oversight for, I suppose, some of the broad points made. I do get both what Timothy and Deborah's saying, and even when we do flag it with the committee, obviously we're coming from an EVOG point of view, they'll come from a policy point of view, but at the end of the day that's what the Education Committee is there to do in terms of holding the department and EA account if there has been any shortcomings just in relation to this specific case.
Yeah, no, and I suppose what the department was saying in terms of the end of violence against women and girls strategy, they're not here to duplicate, they're here to potentially add value, but I'll keep going. Go ahead, please, Claire.
Chair, I'm wondering if there's an opportunity, given what Timothy has raised, and to be honest, we have a similar issue in my own constituency, but is there an opportunity to nearly do a screening exercise across all departments, led by the Executive Office, to look at how compliant they are with the strategy around ending violence against women and girls, because I think we're going to keep coming up with issues like this which do ultimately feed into the wider issues as to why we have these problems, because a lot of these policies were drafted and designed at a point when actually we didn't really have this view or this kind of attention. So and I appreciate that what I'm suggesting could be an extensive piece of work, but it's almost as if if we were doing an equality assessment.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I was just going to say actually, the Head of Civil Service is coming the 23rd of September to look at equality impact assessments,
yeah, okay.
and then. But I'm just thinking that we could maybe ask as well that they would also look at a screening from as your suggestion.
Yeah, because I think ultimately this is an executive strategy and it is being undermined by their own policies that sit beneath it. So in a similar way as we would, screen for disability and we would screen for, equality, maybe we should be screening for, our policies and saying, well, actually, are they compliant with this strategy or,
Oh, that's good. Yep, that adds value. Go ahead, please, Sinead.
I would agree with what Anya has said as well. I think this issue clearly rests with the Education Authority, but there are issues in terms of TAO is leading on the strategy, but other partners, organisations, government departments are delivering on that strategy. So whilst we're not divorced from it as a department here and maybe taking the lead, certainly when issues do arise, it is the individual organisations, be that the Education Authority, be that an individual school, that actually ensures that it delivers on that policy. But we must remember as well that it is a policy. It is not a statutory obligation at this point. So there are issues in and around just the scope and the width and the breadth of us being able to actually direct organisations to behave in such a way. So look, I think that it's clouded by that, but certainly within the Education Authority, I think this really rests in their lap.
Thank you. I'll bring Deborah back in. Thank you.
Yeah, it's just I don't disagree with any of those points. I just want to make very clearly today, like, this conversation has stemmed out of one school, and the situation that arises there are an awful lot of sensitivities regarding that, and I just also want to place on record, I mean, that school had recent inspectorates from ETI and EA, and there was no safeguarding concerns that they had raised within those, and of course those are publicly available documents. So just because we're talking about and we have named a Pacific school, I just want to make very clear that because this committee has obviously been in the headlines recently with schools being named in the committee, I want to make very clear that this school, there's records there that say there's no safeguarding concerns at this moment in time, and the school has been trying to do what they can do. Again, I state, with the policy that they have to follow regarding EA that has been placed upon them.
Okay, Timothy, go ahead and then we'll try and wrap up actions. Thank you.
I'll be honest, Deborah, I disagree with you, because I've been attempting and have attempted to correspond with the school who haven't corresponded back with me. I think they've hid from this issue, and because the perpetrator is a newcomer child, this is why they are finding it difficult to deal with this situation. I do believe that this incident is being treated differently because it involves a newcomer child.
I think we have to be careful.
Okay, I think we're going.
Honestly, I think we're really overstretching here. I don't know how many times Timothy has had to say newcomer. You know, honestly, Timothy, these are children.
Absolutely.
We need to protect them all.
Absolutely. And one victim is one victim too many. And it's a case of, this has come to this committee because we are tasked with ending violence against women and girls. This is the executive strategy, this is the lead department, and we have two parents here who feel very let down by the school and their actions. And when we are writing, can we also copy in the Education Minister?
Yes, okay. I suppose we've got agreement there around those pieces of correspondence, and then we'll enhance the invite to the head of civil service around the screening, because I think that was a really useful suggestion. Okay, we'll move on then. So 9.14 and 9.28, so it's an individual copy of correspondence, First Minister and Deputy First Minister regarding the Justice Bill. I'm going to refer you to pages 185 to 186 of the meeting pack and pages 162 to 163 of the table pack. Just to advise that the committee has been copied into correspondence to the First and Deputy First Ministers in relation to the Justice Bill. Correspondence has been shared to the Assembly's Information Standards Office to be handled in accordance with the normal process for Freedom of Information request. Information Standards Office are taken forward. The FOI request, further correspondence has been received from the individual who should form, which should form part of that request. So just to seek your agreement to note these items and agree to forward the further letter to the Information Standards Officer to consider as part of the original FOI request. Agreed?
Yeah.
Okay, so 9.15, Committee for the Economy Regional Balance Bill, going to refer you to pages 187 of your pack, just to advise that the committee has received correspondence from the Economy Committee regarding the Regional Balance Bill. The bill was formally introduced on the 8th of June 2026, and as per normal practice, the committee is seeking the views of all Assembly statutory committees. Links to the bill and the EFM are included within the correspondence. So I'm going to seek your agreement to write to the Department and ask whether TO has any views or comments on the bill, and whether there are any implications or any rule for TO arising from the bill. Agreed? Okay, and well done, Sinead. I'm sure you're relieved to get it introduced. Okay, moving on, members. 9.18, individual electric chargers, Parliament buildings. We're going to refer you to pages 185 to 186. Just to advise, the committee has received correspondence from an individual in relation to the use of electric chargers at Parliament buildings, and just asking you to note this item and to forward the correspondence to the Assembly Commission, as the matter is currently under review by the Commission. Agreed? Yeah. Okay, 9.20, ERA Committee, hunting with dogs bill, so refer you to page 81 of the table pack. Just to advise, the committee has received correspondence from the ERA Committee regarding the hunting with dogs bill. The ERA Committee launched its public call for evidence on the 15th of June 2026, and as per normal practice, the committee is seeking the views of all Assembly statutory committees. Links to the bill and EFM are included within the correspondence. I'm just going to seek your agreement to write to the Department to ask whether TO has any views or comments on the bills, and whether there are any implications or any rule for TO arising from the bill. Agreed? Do you want in, Sinead? You all right? No. Your microphone's on this, okay. 9.21, Minister for Communities New Foundations Programme, and you'll find information on pages 42 to 44 of the table pack. So the committee has received a response to its correspondence of the 24th of April 2026 in relation to the legal and operational requirements for a potential cross-agency data sharing framework with the New Foundations Programme, or to identify if there are any existing statutory powers that can be used to support improved service coordination for victims and survivors. Minister Lyons has advised that, having considered the request and after consultation with colleagues in the Department of Health, his officials have concluded that DFC is unable to support the development of a data sharing framework with the New Foundations Programme. He advised that the preferred approach is that officials work collaboratively with the COSAGA and relevant partners through strategic engagement, using anonymised and aggregated information where appropriate, and survivor-led approaches to ensure that safeguarding dignity and psychological safety remain paramount. So to seek your agreement to note this and to consider this further when COSAGA comes before us at our next meeting. Okay? I'm just going to ask the clerk to read other items into the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few items. Item 9.2 is the Hansard report from the ICRIR session on the May review report on 17th of June. Item 9.3 from the Minister for the Communities, a response to correspondence of the 12th of June in relation to Grand Central Station. Item 9.5 from the Department of Justice in relation to the new Commissioner for Victims and Witnesses of Crime, to be added to NIPSO's remit. Item 9.7 from First Minister and Deputy First Minister is a response to correspondence of the 24th of April on Victims Support Funding Programme. Item 9.9 from TEO is a response to correspondence of the 24th of April in relation to the EVOG and First Delivery Plan. Items 9.12 and 9.13, again from First and Deputy First Minister, are written statements and a news release on the appointment of the new Police Ombudsman. Item 9.16 is Committee for Finance in relation to the inquiry into performance and culture of the NICS. Item 9.17 from Legal Services is the 70th report of the Examiner of Statutory Rules. There are no rules for the attention of this committee in that report. Item 9.19 from Ulster University is a report on unlocking Northern Ireland's potential. Item 9.22, the ISNI Investing Activity Report dated 28th of June. Item 9.23 from the Commissioner for Public Appointments, it's the annual report 25-26. Item 9.24 is a response from TEO to the committee's correspondence of 21st of May, a response to Module 2 of the COVID inquiry. Item 9.26 is a Hansard report from the Quality Commission's briefing on 24th of June. And item 9.27 is a TEO news release on the Minister's Welcome Public Inquiry and Redress Scheme legislation.
Okay, anybody want to comment on any of that? No. Okay, so I'm going to move on to item 10, draft forward work programme. You're going to find this on pages 517 to 519 of your pack, and I'm going to ask the Assistant Clerk to talk through any changes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So obviously this is our last meeting before summer recess, so when we come back on the 9th of September we will have an oral briefing from the bill sponsor on age discrimination, good facilities and services bill. We will also
That'll
have
be a tough one.
an oral briefing with the NI Survival Council on Nothing About Us, their insights report, and we'll also have an oral briefing from Queen's on the prevalence and impact of their study on adverse childhood experiences in Northern Ireland. Also, I just want to get members' agreement. Obviously, we had to cancel our joint meeting with the Committee for Justice on the 30th of June due to the bill. Having talked to the clerk in Justice, they have so much legislation that they wouldn't be able to hold a joint meeting or concurrent meeting, until the end of November, December. That'll be a year since the Ombudsman report was published. So if members are happy to have that oral evidence session just with this committee, and then we can share the Hansards and any relevant written papers with Justice Committee.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So any other business? Go ahead.
Yeah, there's one thing I want to raise, and it's on the back of the Spotlight investigation where there has been allegations raised which I believe involve TEO and do involve the remit of this committee, and it goes back to that trip to Washington in March 2008 where the junior minister at the time was Jeffrey Donaldson. And the allegation says that sources say Jeffrey Donaldson has sat down on a female MLA's lap. She has told us that she felt so disgusted and uncomfortable by his behaviour that she immediately got up and left. As part of Mr. Putz's, so he has established an investigation to encourage people, if there is anything that's happened that's been inappropriate, to come forward. I think there's a bit of work needs to be done within TEO to go back to establish, during his time as junior minister, was this incident recorded? Was it reported? Was there any investigation done into the former DUP leader? And I suppose the big question is, who is that victim at that time? My understanding potentially was a SPAD, who is now an MLA, but we need to ensure we need to ensure that there is an investigation done to see if there's anything that TEO currently holds either in our bureaus or within TEO that would show there has been wrongdoing, and that information needs to be forwarded to the investigation that has been set up by the Speaker of this House.
Okay, so let's step back one part then. So there's, my understanding was that the head of the civil service was to look at anything that potentially could have happened within TEO during Donaldson's time as junior minister. So I suppose, as opposed to the executive office, and that gives a bit of distance from sort of the political leadership within the executive office and the head of the civil service. So that's where I think that sits. I think that's where the responsibility of that is. But I would support your broader view, and I spoke to Leslie Hogg straight after the announcement in the Chamber about the need for transparency around these pieces of work that were announced in the Chamber around what her role will be, the terms of reference, what the Assembly Commission as a body will be doing in terms of providing transparency around that, and then all the other pieces of work. And I think we as MLAs deserve to see that. So I'm not sure, I think it's more one for correspondence with the head of civil service to ask about the remit, who's involved, etc., in terms of her own, and whether, how they're asking people to come forward, maybe as whistleblowers or otherwise. But I don't think this is for TEO at this stage, since the Speaker has asked people, he said he'd step back. Again, we can have, I don't want necessarily get in discussion around whether he should recuse himself, but he set out 3 processes, and 3 individuals have agreed to take forward those 3 pieces of work. As far as I'm concerned, I'm not sure about Westminster, but that's approach has certainly been made.
The reason for raising this is purely the expectation that if there is details held within TEO of any instance that took part in the past or happened in the past, that information is shared up front with the investigation. It doesn't need to wait until somebody comes forward to say this happened to me. Okay. If there has been an investigation taken part in the past, or incidents have been reported to any officials, that proactively that is shared with those carrying out the investigation.
Go ahead, please, Claire.
Has the head of the civil service confirmed they will take forward this? My understanding is that the Speaker had written, but I wasn't sure if there was any confirmation.
I'm not sure. I would imagine that in advance, because I know that the Chief Executive, Leslie Hogg, was asked in advance whether she would be content to take this forward. So I can't imagine the Speaker announcing this without having contact certainly with either her or her office to get broad agreement, not necessarily on the terms of reference or the specifics.
Is it worth this committee seeking that confirmation in writing, given the nature of the Junior Minister role in the Executive Office?
Well, I suppose I would go further than just the confirmation, but certainly picking up some of these. What's happening, process, timescales. Can we ask the committee team then to maybe work on that? And we can. And I think that's maybe something.
Chair,
sorry, please go ahead, Sinead.
Sorry, just added into that so that we could get the terms of reference of what that investigation would be as well. And I take the point. Donaldson was the junior minister at that time. So therefore, obviously, the TEO can't really investigate itself. So externally, that investigation must take place. But the terms of reference and the amount of accountability and transparency about that, we need to actually know the details.
Okay, no, thank you. Content? Okay, any other business? No. Okay, well, the time, date and place next meeting won't be until the 9th of September, 2 p.m. in this room. The meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
Committee Room 30, Sound. Committee Room 30, Sound. Committee Room 30, Sound. Committee Room 30, Sound. Committee Room 30, Sound.